Hello and welcome. Today we're talking about a topic that's close to the heart of every modern business: how to make sustainability not just a responsibility, but a real competitive advantage. And I'm delighted to have with us today Jasper Steinhausen, sustainability strategist, author of international bestseller Making Sustainability Profitable, and founder of Business with Impact. We'll talk about his book and the trends shaping the future of sustainable business. Jasper, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a great pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you so much, Alina. It's absolutely my pleasure to be here. Well, Alina, as far back as I can possibly remember, I've actually been engaged in sustainability discussions. So I was brought up in a home where around the dinner table we were discussing, how do we make the world better for the many? So, that's really been I guess you could say, a starting point for me. Um, and then in my gymnasium years, I had a specific class of geography where Tom, my teacher there, he spoke about climate change and about how the melting of the Arctic ice sheet. Well, back then that was just a theory. Now we know it's absolutely true and it's happening, but will affect the Gulf Stream that brings up the warm waters that give us this relatively stable and warm climate that we live in here in Scandinavia, and that potentially could even stop it. And if that would happen, then ironically, global warming, as was the main phrase back then, could lead to a spread of the Arctic climate all the way down across Scandinavia. And that did something to my young brain, which was kind of like, whoa, is this the magnitude of the experiment? And very clearly, this also something that's going to affect the many and the lives of people and society and everything. So it really got me curious and got me sort of started on the path of working with environment. So I've been doing that ever since. The thing is, right now, sustainability is a standalone subject. Is kind of like dead in the water, right? There's so much headwind to the agenda right now. So the problem is that most people treat sustainability as if it was only about sustainability, but in reality, it's not. It's competing for attention against a lot of other agendas. So here's the thing: impact follows perceived value, right? So if if we want something to happen, it has to be aligned with what whoever it is we want to make a different types of action, what they perceive as valuable. So for me, I see that there are a couple of trends going on right now, and that I think is going to be a lot bigger, some movements. And the first one is really away from sustainability as a standalone thing into integration. So more about operational excellence, about human resources and how we attract and maintain talent and grow it, and about innovation, very much so, about productivity, about competitiveness. Um, so we're actually, you could obviously sit down and define sustainability along the traditional lines of, meeting the needs of the present without compromising future generations, kind of Brundtland report approach, even though I think that needs an upgrade, but that's a different story. You can get that if you like. But anyway, for me, it really is about knowing that if you want big impact, you got to solve big existing business problems. So it's this connection between sustainability and business that means if you really want to create some results, you have to anchor it into business. So for me, sustainability is really a massive value driver that positively, sorry, impacts the world at the same time. So I think that's what we're aiming for all the time. It's business with embedded environmental impact. Yeah. Well, it's a very good question, and one that is at the core of many, many business leaders' minds. The thing is that business leaders in, especially in product-based businesses, have kind of lost touch with the heart of their business. And what do I mean by that? Well, leaders today, they don't really know how to, and they don't do obviously, but they don't really know how to work strategically with the flow of resources. So the thing is that typically we've been running a business through looking at three different flows, right? So the flow of time, flow of money, and the flow of resources. But something happened in what is typically called the golden era of capitalism from around 1950 to beginning of 1970s, the oil crisis in 73. And that was that we had this seemingly abundance of energy and materials, and they just kept getting cheaper and cheaper. So if you look at a graph of the development in price of energy or materials, well, of course it will wobble a bit, but the general trend is very, very clear that it just became cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So over that period of time, what happened was that gradually the strategic focus on flow of resources disappeared from management literature and from management training, which means that today it's not really part of it. It's just basically cost of operations that, of course, somebody needs to look at. And if you run a super energy intensive or material intensive, well, of course, you do have a focus on it. But for the vast majority, this is something that, a head of production or whatever they're called has under their job description, but they're not really getting measured on it because we've been so focused at optimizing the flow of time, so the hours that we spend, that that's everything around traditional way of looking at productivity. It's all about how do we run faster and do things smarter, right? So there is very little time for that. So they're so embedded in delivery and making sure the operations actually work. So when I ask people in such positions if they have any ideas of way they could improve, they have tons. And then it's okay, when do we work on those? Hardly ever, because I don't have time, right? So the thing is that those who are on the top, they don't really have a strategic view on the flow of resources. And that's really needed because, and these are numbers from the National Danish Statistics. So relatively, they're going to be even bigger outside Denmark because we have so high salaries. But if we look at it, an average Danish company, manufacturing company, has a little over 50%, 50, a little more than that, of all costs are tied to raw materials and components. And only just shy of 25% is into salary, right? So if you then lower the salary base because you live in another part of the world, well, then it's going to be even a bigger proportion. So the weird thing is that today it's actually by far the biggest chunk of money that is allocated to an area that gets very little strategic attention. So by getting that back in, by changing this understanding, by looking at the flow of resources, you will be able to discover new opportunities and new ways of solving important problems that will create value as well as impact. What I wanted to do was create something as simple as at all possible. So trying to make something that hopefully everybody can take and start to work with on their own without needing somebody like me being around to helping them. Because when that's needed, things move too slowly and we don't have time. It's the only thing we don't have. So anyway, there are 5 steps in this. First one is mindset. Second is mission. Third is mapping. Fourth is movement. And the fifth and final one is magnify. So what does that mean? What's underneath those words? Well, the first one is really about getting the right approach and the right foundation. And we already touched a bit upon this about the mindset and how we are, what people think. And so we need to have this reconnect with all of this. So it's changing the mindset around it. And under there are 5 that are called the fatal 5 main problems in the way the majority of people think and work and approach sustainability. And then I've created correlating what I call 5 to thrive. So that's really the part about in the first step. It is getting that mental transformation, right? So you need a mental transformation before you can transform your company. So that's really the starting point. The second, which was called mission, is getting clarity on the North Star, really. What are we doing here? So if you imagine navigating, it's always towards the North Star if you're out in the in the open. And so that's going to guide all the major decisions. And it's also what fuels everything. So once you get this connection between what is really, really important for you, also on a personal level, that's the fuel to keep going. So this is also why we see that impact-driven companies and startups and so on, they tend to be more resilient and tend to bounce back better and faster when they get into turmoil and problems. So that's really the second part, is knowing where we're actually going. Then the third part is getting a strategic plan for what are the specific and actual initiatives that we need to take to move towards where we want to go, towards our North Star, but in highly valuable steps, right? And this is another part where there is a big difference between most of what I've seen out there in different methods. So I use the circular economy and the 5 different disciplines as ways to discover potential steps, but there are other ways, and you can use basically whatever you like. But what is so essential is that once you then have all your ideas, let's just imagine you have 50 things you could potentially do, then the matching part up against core business priorities, that's the essential part. So I ask clients I sit with, what is the typically, I say 3 to 5 biggest business problems and priorities you're facing right now? And who's your ideal client and what's their corresponding 3 to 5? And then we use that as a filter. So you have this is the top priorities of you and the top priorities of your ideal clients. And then you take these 50 ideas and basically mash them through a filter. And let's just say only 7 of those come out on the other side. Well, then you know that each of these 7 ideas will, independently of whatever they do on the world, they will be high value for the business because they will contribute to solving some of the biggest problems that we are facing right now. And then it will also additionally have a positive impact on the world somehow. So by making sure that you have the majority of your steps in your plan or roadmap or whatever you want to call it, being stuff that are very closely connected to solving high value problems in a way that also delivers impact. Well, that actually means that now you are taking steps and you're moving away from this image and this narrative in the world that sustainability is just a problem, it's costly, it's bad for business, and we got to lower our standards all the time, to now it's all of a sudden about, oh, we are creating new and better solutions to solve our biggest problems. That also has an impact on the world. So it completely flips the script, right? So those are the first 3 steps, and I call these the learning phase because that's where we set up everything. And then we move into the 2 last ones that I call the earning phase because this is where the fun starts, right? So step 4 is really about, going from word to action. And if you've done step 3 right, well, then this is not necessarily easier, but it's at least a lot easier to prioritize. So a lot of people that's gonna, hear this will probably have experienced that it's a bit of an uphill battle sometimes to push these sustainability projects. They keep sort of being stranded and stalled and having problems and blah blah blah. And that is typically, to me, if you keep having to push it, for me that's a very clear sign that you have not connected it clearly enough to value. So once you've done step 3 right, well, then all of a sudden, this is what you want to spend the first 3 hours of your day where your brain is at maximum capacity. That's where you want to spend it because now it's helping you solve some of the biggest problems, right? So this is back to the impact follows perceived value. Now this is perceived as high value. So this is what you want to do. Of course, this is innovation and business development. So it can be equally hard as any other types of innovation and business development. But now you have the drive and the desire to get it, right? Because it connects with your personal values and it solves some of your biggest problems. It makes sense in a short, right? So that's step 4. It's really turning that into action. And this is, well, if you want to connect it to other phrases and tools, this is change management generally. How do I implement and change the world around me? It's innovation, it's change management, it's implementation, right? So, and then the fifth and final step is going out and inspire and attract people around you. So you can do all the right things in the world, but if you don't tell anybody about it, nobody will ever be able to give you credit for it. So you got to go out and speak, and without, of course, you should not do greenwashing in any way, but you cannot be so fearful of being accused of it that you don't say anything. So you got to go out. And the reason why I don't just call it communicate, but talk about magnify, is that I want people to go out and speak about this with the intention also to inspire others. Partly because it makes your communication more interesting and less just salesy, but also because we need, again, time is the only thing we don't have. So we need people around us to see that it is doable. It is a false narrative that it's all just costly and bad for business and all of that, but that they start to see these good examples of companies who come out with a super good business case and a better solution that also has an impact on the world. So that's the fifth and final step. So yeah, so these are the 5 steps, 3 that sort of set you up and 2 that turns it into reality. I think the biggest thing here is killing the narrative that sustainability is a problem, right? Because that is the starting point. I've been testing this on all continents. Well, not in Arctic, but apart from that, and I have not, unfortunately, found anybody anywhere that says nope. This is actually also what it's like here in my backyard. So as I said, sustainability is a problem. It's costly. It's bad for business, and we have to lower our standards in many ways. That's the starting point, and that's how most people talk about it. Business leaders, politicians, lots of experts as well, people that ideally should be helping this to elevate and move faster. They also help digging the hole every day. So the key thing is to starting with changing this mindset part. And as I said, there are really um, five things, the fatal five, as I said, and the first one, well, we actually already talked a bit about that. It's this notion that sustainability is just about sustainability, which again, as I said, I want to shift it with start and end with business, right? So this is anchored in these 3 to 5 problems that we talked about before. So the first one is this shift in understanding about what is this really all about. The second one is that this is an agenda that's sort of marinated in guilt, right? Don't do this, stop doing this, avoid doing this, minimize yourself, right? It's all about reduce and avoid and stop and being less bad. And it's really a problematic approach for several reasons. One is that it lacks, it's not an energy driven agenda, right? It's a negative avoidance agenda. So getting people on board that are not already sold to this notion and has a desire to make the change, it's really not an interesting agenda. It's a stop doing rather than hey, let's do more, kind of. But what's actually a way bigger problem is that the way we talk about sustainability actually makes the task bigger. Right, so I'll say that again because this is super essential. The way we talk about sustainability makes the task bigger. And I don't know about you, but I think it's big enough. Just fixing climate, biodiversity, plastics, whatever, the list is very long, as you know. Uh, and why is that? Is if you imagine just going back 1,000 years to your ancestors, and somebody is about to take away a piece of clothes, building material, food, something, what would they do? What would be their reaction? well, they would fight for dear life, right? They will know that if we lose this, it might mean that we'll freeze or our children will starve to death or something. But 1,000 years ago, evolutionary, that's yesterday, right? It's a blink of an eye. So the brain is still running the same way. So whenever we communicate something about reducing, avoiding, letting go of, instantly the reptile brain, which is the part of the brain that's running the show really, it will say, don't do it. It's going to kill the kids, right? So, so whenever somebody stands up and start talking about, just saying something like, okay, our goal is to reduce carbon emissions with 70%. Boom, you already lost them, right? Instantly, everybody listening to this, their brains is going to say, I don't like this. This is going to be bad for me and my family. So it's so essential to shift and reframe to talk about how to create new and better versions that ultimately have some form of positive impact. Because when we do that, well, then all of a sudden it's not a problem at all for the reptile brain, and it will also land in the part of the brain where imagination sits. Because if I tell you what will be a new and better version of your core product, well, that kind of like, well, what would it actually look like? You have to start imagining what could it be? And if there's anything we need right now, it's all the imagination we can possibly, foster, right? So it starts the right state and place in the brain, and it avoids tricking this scarcity element that we all know is so used in marketing, right? It's why you go in and looking for a pair of shoes, and all of a sudden it's kind of like there's only 3 pairs left, which is kind of like, yeah, sure, the only pair left of Nike shoes in the world. I don't think so, but but that's what you're constantly being told because it triggers the same point just with a reverse intention. But anyway, so it's from minimize and avoid and being less bad to creating new and better that somehow leads to positive impact. So that's the second step. The third is about green products cost more. Again, as I said, so embedded. But we talked about before the flow of resources and how more than 50% of all costs are tied to it. There are so much that can be done here, and yet we still keep telling ourselves that it's always going to be more costly. Recently, I've been working with a company in the UK, and they've been able to do an 80x, right? 80 times return on the investment of having me around helping them to point out some of this stuff, simply by starting to look differently at the flow of resources. So the team there has done a tremendous job of spotting these opportunities and again speaking about this the right way and positioning it the right way and anchoring it up towards what was perceived as valuable in this specific company. So there's so much that can be done to make stuff cheaper. And so just if you start by saying, I expect this is going to be more costly, well, then that's where you end, because the brain works with whatever task we give it. So you gotta simply increase your standard and say, well, I want a product. This is the task, dear brain. It is to create a new and better version of our product that, and I would actually say price in itself is not so interesting, but price versus value, perceived value, that's the interesting thing, because this is an innovation agenda. So very often you will end up creating, a different, potentially even a slightly different product, right? Just like there is a massive difference between buying the cheapest and the most luxurious car you can imagine. But they're both cars. But nobody will look at them and say, this is the same product. A Lamborghini and a Skoda is not the same product by no means, right? But they're both cars and they can both take you from A to B. So of course they're not the same. And you could say one is very expensive and the other far more than the other. But if you look at price versus perceived value, then apparently it must match, right? So it could be that the price sticker goes up, but then only if the perceived value goes up at least as much, right? So that's the third one. Fourth one, don't mess with the core business. That's been the key thing for many, many years, that it's too risky to go in and mess with the core business, which is why we've seen this, endless stream of small, scratching the surface type of initiatives. The thing is today, it's high risk if you don't, right? Because we get better and better at spotting, basically, it's, for lack of a better word, it's our bullshit detector, right? We get better and better at seeing. So, okay, so the core business and the core product is the same crap as always, but now wrapped in packaging that is sustainable, just not good enough, right? So you have to know and understand that this is a new way of doing things. This is a new way of doing business. So that's the shift in the fourth one. It's from standalone, shying away from the core, to knowing this is a way of doing business. So that's the fourth shift. And the fifth and final one is, today, so many companies still keep it quite a lot to themselves what they're doing. And it's also fairly few people who are involved inside a company. It has to shift to being open, transparent, and collaborative, because this is a team sport. Nobody can do this on their own, and also we see that if you want any form of fast track support here, you have to go out and let people know what it is you're trying to solve. We tend to think that our problem is unique, but whatever you are looking for, somebody woke up this morning with the solution. So if you go out and tell people, hey, this is where I am, this is what I'm aiming to get to, and this is what I'm struggling with right now, somebody can come and say, hey, I can fix you that. I can help you with that. I can work for you. I can sell you this, whatever it is, right? So that's basically the fast track. So those are the shift and the mindset. And once you change your mindset, you change your business. Well, that's an interesting question. And I actually think the first thing that came to my mind is actually, right now I keep stumbling upon new cases of use of fungi. So this becomes very specific, but um, I'm amazed of how many different solutions and places we see that all of a sudden fungi comes out as part of cleaning up soils and problematic substances, of creating materials, or it just keeps popping up in my feed also. That is a lot of where I find the inspiration. So if I should point to one thing that keeps surprising me right now, it's actually how broad and how a seemingly endless um, source of inspiration and solutions that the world of fungi is. I think that I I rest assured knowing that we are not at peak human, right? We can and will create better solutions for our society, and more sustainable ones. I often think of, especially politicians, the way they talk about sustainability as if they kind of think every step we can possibly take in any direction will take us to a place that's worse than today. Uh, I know that's luckily not the truth. There are so many things we can do better and smarter, and we've solved so many problems before. So if I take these sort of zoom out, I think what makes me optimistic is that I know we are not at peak human, and I know we can and will deliver better solutions. Question is, how much pain do we need to experience before we really put our minds into solving it? So some, probably most of your readers, are already putting a lot of energy into it, but we also have a lot of decision makers who are not, and some who are actually directly working against it. But apart from that, I know we can, and sustainability can be a really, really powerful innovation platform. And again, this is also back to this fact that we have a different perspective. It's like a lens you look through that makes you see new types of solutions. So traditional sustainability officer, whatever they call themselves, whoever is working with this and reading this, they can actually contribute a lot to solving problems simply because they look at the world through a different lens. And go to page 2 of any book of innovation. It is about getting a different perspective and look at the whatever problem you have through that lens. So we can offer something, and as I said, that's kind of disappeared from leadership as a discipline. So I think that's really it. And if you ask about, the key takeaway, it is that sustainability is not a cost center. It is a profit driver if done right.